Just even in my life, I tried to just do everything the most efficient way possible.
Because the key now is like you've got to that level, and that's awesome. Let's keep you here.
In CounterStrike, so many of the things are in the timing, right? Sometimes 1 second is way too much.
Because I feel like some of my persona in CounterStrike changed who I was as a person.
Oh, what? Jumping double for gold!
Today I'm talking with Jared Tendler, an extremely accomplished sports psychologist. He has authored 2 bestsellers, The Mental Game of Poker 1 and 2. He has coached some of the most elite poker players in the world, elite golfers, traders, and esports athletes. And of course, we know him for his work with TeamLiquid and their players. You may have noticed I've been speaking not just with players or talent, but others whose expertise serves to push the envelope in our continually developing industry. This is the DDK Show. If you enjoy it, subscribe on YouTube, give it 5 stars on Apple Podcast, follow on Spotify, support me on patreon.com/DDK esports, or simply connect with me on Twitter. If you leave a review or comment on one of the aforementioned platforms, please consider mentioning ideas, people, or topics you find interesting. This is still a side project for me, and the positive support really helps. And without further ado, here's my conversation with Jared Tendler. Okay, Jared, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I'm really excited about this one because those that follow my content, they know that this is kind of my favorite thing, is talking about performance, especially the mental side of performance. So I don't think there's really anyone better to talk to about it.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. Good to talk to you. And I know John and Stu speak highly of you, so it's good stuff.
Yeah, it's really a very underdeveloped and underrepresented area, I think, in the esports world. But of course, you yourself, you come from, I suppose, or at least I suppose you're most known from the poker world and the work that you've done and the books that you've written, which pertain specifically more to ideas and concepts that are in poker, like, for example, tilt, which will be a word that derived from it's poker terminology effectively, but of course it does carry across into everything because it really comes back to it's the human mind at the end of the day. So how has it been in being so interdisciplinary with your work in kind of mental performance?
Yeah, it's been fun, to be honest. I mean, I started in golf because I know the game really well. I played competitively in college and was an All-American and won tournaments and wanted to play professionally myself. So I kind of started in that world because I knew it so well, and then started working with poker when an opportunity kind of fell in my lap. And it was a very interesting transition because one of my first clients was a former professional golfer, and so he really kind of helped me to learn the language of poker and talk about the issues that players were experiencing in golfing terms. And so kind of making that transition was kind of seamless. And then from poker, then traders started picking up the book because there's obviously a lot of traders play poker, and they're whether they're gambling in the markets or they're gambling at casino, it's can be similar types of stuff. So that transition has been kind of ongoing, and then esports popped up ironically through poker, as Victor Goosens used to play poker and was roommates with a client of mine, and that's kind of how I got hooked up in esports. And learning the language of esports was probably as complicated as learning poker early on. It was like a completely new world, a whole new culture. But at the end of the day, we're all humans, so the issues are the same. It's just a question of kind of understanding the context with which they show up, and the language with which players understand those issues. And I'd say esports was kind of equal in poker in some respects, in that early on, players were really unaware of some of the basic functioning of how the mind works and the types of issues that show up and the way that compromises decision making and performance.
And quickly before we kind of dive into the nitty gritty, talking about your background, did you get involved in, or rather, I should say, were the majority of your insights, because of course you have that background in psychology, but specifically with sports performance, were a lot of the insights that you had driven by your knowledge of psychology first, would you say, or would you say it was more directly experiential through trying to become the best golfer you could be?
I would say both. I would say that my my insights came from the fact that I failed as a golfer, and I failed psychologically. Right. So the very simple story is freshman year of college, that summer I tried to qualify for the U.S. Open, which is one of the biggest golf tournaments in the world. And it was a difficult challenge, and there's 2 stages of qualifying. So the first round is called local qualifying. It's 18 holes. Usually like the top 3 or 4 out of 90 get through and qualify. In that tournament, I played some of the best golf of my life from tee to green. But the putting was where I choked. And I ended up missing 4 putts that were very short distance that were entirely due to pressure. And so I missed 4 shots because of that. And then I missed qualifying by a shot. So that was like the first time that I'd ever had, like a psychological breakdown like that, where, like before, if I played bad, it was because I was playing bad. This was clearly like my mind. And so that was like kind of the first, signal to me that I needed to kind of work on this area of the game. And so I did that. And sports psychology was fairly new. This is now, I'm kind of an old man here. This was 20 plus years ago. And I improved in every way except when the pressure was the highest. So, college tournaments I could win, big national events, I would choke. And so it was from that like motivated me to figure out how to solve the problems, because the sports psychology that was there available at the time couldn't solve my issues. And so I was kind of just driven to find an answer, because I still wanted to play professional golf. But I kind of reasoned that, like, as I was getting ready to graduate, like, it just was not smart to just try. I knew I was going to fail, and I'm not just one to just try something. So I got a degree in counseling psychology, a master's degree in counseling psychology, and then spent 2 years getting licensed as a therapist, not with the intent of ever being, a shrink, but with the intent of learning the skills that therapists have, which is to do deeper problem solving. And then to combine that knowledge with my sports psychology and performance experience and knowledge to create a program that I thought would be a bit more kind of all encompassing, in a sense, that could, solve the issues of players that were like me, and hopefully solve my own issues in the process, which did end up happening. So I did end up playing some professional golf a couple years after getting my license and starting my golf practice. But it was really, I think, kind of the combination of those 2 forces that really allowed me to, create a unique program.
So one thing you're talking about there is tilt, and obviously, not tilt, sorry, choking. We'll get to tilt later. Getting ahead of myself, but choking, and so choking is a really interesting one because so for me, one of the insights I have had, and feel free to kind of grab any of these ideas and kind of make sense of them. But would you say that choking is, as a lot of it is down to identity as well? Like, that's an issue that can come up once let's say you've been choking for a while. Eventually your identity you'll form an identity relationship with that inner narrative of, every time I get to this point, I'm unable to perform as I should. And like, you start to build those mental blocks. And so is it as well in a narrative issue as it is then also another issue which caused the choking in the first place? I guess those are the 2 things I'm trying to get at. Does any of that make sense?
It does, yeah. So I mean, you could say that you form an identity with it. Some players would just say that, like, it becomes like a kind of a self-fulfilling thing. Like, now because I think I'm going to choke, then I'm going to choke. But that's not really what's happening. It's that they don't have a solution, right? If you don't have an answer to why it is that you're failing like that, then you're basically just doomed to keep repeating it, unless you do something dramatic where, like, you just go up on stage and you say, the heck with it. I'm just not going to care at all, and I have no expectations. And if I fail, I fail, and and so that might work. But then the second that it works, then all of a sudden now, you're gonna have to come up with a new trick of the mind to kind of get yourself out of it. But yeah, I mean, I'm not like, I know that there are like kind of people who like get into like the heavy narratives. I tend to think more of that as being a symptom, and we can use and understand the narrative with which, and so for people who aren't necessarily familiar with that, it's like you have like a story that you tell yourself. There's things that you say into your mind, or that kind of come to mind as you're, let's say, preparing for an event that is quite big, and there's a high risk of you choking again. And so there's all these things that you kind of build up about it, and all these things that you think about it afterwards, and all that narrative to me just becomes illustrative of the way that you're thinking and we can use the way that you're thinking to better understand why it is that you're thinking that way, right? And if you see that as a symptom and you start asking like the why questions, like that can be often a beginning way to kind of start unwinding the chaos that is ultimately what turns into choking.
So I think what's really difficult for a lot of people, myself included in various ways in this regard, is that it's very difficult to kind of understand when there's that spot where you're supposed to kind of sit down and take that reference point away, or even know to look for it, or like what is the reference point, or where is the problem. All I'm seeing is this conclusion of I'm struggling with this, and I don't know at which point I need to be kind of sensitive or have the awareness to understand where those things are that are going wrong. Like, do you understand what I mean? Because I think that sensitivity and that awareness is something I got as I got older. But I know when I was a young player, everything just seemed like a huge jumble. So would you say there are processes to kind of unjumble your thoughts and feelings so you can kind of be more, or rather a better observer of yourself?
Yes, and the simple one is writing. Too many people, players, they just tend to like vent. They unleash their toxicity, whether it's in forums or verbally. And to some extent, like if it's not like actually hurting other players, it's like it's fine to do that. But ultimately, like you want to write to better understand what's going through your mind, right? Because sometimes you just have these thoughts and you don't even necessarily understand that they're connected to the problem. So what you're ultimately looking for is to kind of try to map the escalation of the problem, escalation of the anxiety, escalation of the anger, escalation of the overconfidence. And if you can do that, then you have an ability to stop it. But to get that map, you're going to spend time writing down what you're actually thinking in particular moments. So like in the loadout, before a big match, after a big match, after you make a mistake, after a team loses a round when, you get kind of the opposite clutch, like somebody gets clutches on you, or, you have one, and then how that like leads to a huge adrenaline rush. And then, you end up making mistakes in the next round. You're basically trying to map all of these different situations, understand the thoughts that are coming to mind at that time, understand the changes in your posture and your behavior in terms of your actions, the feelings or the sensations in your body, right? Do you feel a rush? Do you feel tense? Do you feel tight? What's your hand like on the mouse or the keyboard? What changes in your decision-making process? How are you communicating with your teammates differently? Again, you're trying to get like a good map of what's going on. And the more that you have that, the more you can build on it. I think the biggest thing is that, like anything else, it is a skill. Some people may be naturally more talented at it. It comes to them easier. Others are not, and they have to build it. And in my experience, and this wasn't exclusive to CounterStrike, but like in esports, I think in general, the awareness for mental stuff is low to begin with. So that means your ability to see and map what's happening is low until you actually spend some time really being aware, writing down, studying, and then learning, and ultimately training your ability to see that stuff in real time.
Do you think, as you say correctly, because I was just thinking the same thing, with esports being an arena where most people don't have the understanding that this kind of the mental aspect is even kind of there to work on, and it's already, I think, a vulnerable thing for any athlete or any person that's playing anything competitively. Do you think that there's very much this idea of that? I think it's like, is it the 4 pillars of competency, like the unconscious incompetency, where like there, I'm incompetent, but I'm unaware as to the things I'm incompetent at. And by that notion, do you believe that because the mental game is such a difficult thing to master, but as you say, you just need to have the awareness and know what you're tackling? Is it possible for anybody to become top 1% in like any sport or game or competitive pursuit?
Yes, if the game is still new, not when it's kind of fully evolved, as in most traditional sports are. Esports, I think, is getting pretty damn close, if it's not already there. I'd be surprised if it's fully there, where somebody. I know that there are a lot of like incredibly talented players out there who may not spend a lot of time on this area, and they may not need to yet. But I think we're going to see in the next 3 to 5 years where it's going to become standard. And if you're not working on it, you don't have a chance.
Do you think that some people are in a position where it might be impossible to fix certain issues. Have you ever run into like extremely troublesome cases where someone was just lacking those tools or the ability to develop tools to tackle these issues they may face?
There's only one requirement, which is the willingness and the desire to want to be better at it. As long as you can raise your hand and say, yes, I want to get better at this, and you're willing to put the work in, then you can get better at it. It's not like some kind of physical limitation or perhaps even some intellectual limitation that may exist. I think there are limitations that are out there that we don't kind of firmly understand. At the same time, there are limitations that we put on ourselves that probably don't exist either. But I think at the end of the day, no, I have not seen a case that has been kind of purely hopeless. I mean, I'm certain that there are people out there that have some bigger personal psychological issues. They have some versions of some mental illness that is really impairing them, and they need more traditional clinical psychological help. But if we just look in the sphere of like just esport performance and the psychological side of that, removing any kind of deeper personal issues, then no. I mean, it really just comes down to a willingness to do the work and the willingness to find the resources and the help that they need to get the answers they need. I'm an example of it, right? I think at the end of the day, if you believe that there are answers out there and you keep working, you'll find them. And yeah, maybe like in the way that things are constructed and the availability of advice or resources, may not be just like handed to you, right? But if you go out and do the research and do the work, right, you'll find them or find your own answers.
I think that's a very encouraging thing for maybe some listeners to hear. I know that there's been people that I have spoken to that really struggle with feeling as though it's even possible, and sometimes it almost seems like this very difficult position that you hold. Let's say if you're somebody that's successful and you've done so by kind of brute forcing your mentality in this, or rather having a brute force mentality whereby even if something clearly isn't possible, you're just like, this is possible. This, even to defy any level of reasonableness. But that kind of leads me into this other idea, which I want to ask you about. Actually, these kinds of mentalities, like these winning mentalities, because if you're playing,
I'm going to interrupt you for one
yes,
sec.
Go ahead.
I just want to say one thing before you do. I think some people tend to mistake personality with like mental issues that could be fixed. Right? They say that, oh, I'm just this way. That's just who I am. It's like, yeah, to a degree, but you might actually have some flaws in the way that you're thinking that makes your personality show up in this way, which makes you prone to getting angry with your teammates when they make mistakes, or makes you, overly direct and a bit too toxic, or, have difficulty like, sleeping the night before a big match, or, like there's things that people can kind of tend to just say, oh, that's just who I am. That's just my personality. But at the end of the day, like we are the most adaptive species on the planet. And if you're young, you're even more adaptable than when you're older. So if you put your mind to wanting to fix something, right? Yes, at the end of the day, there are going to be some aspects of your personality that you're not going to change and you're not going to want to. But the way in which your personality shows up sometimes gets blended too much in terms of some of the issues that people experience.
Yeah, and I think no, absolutely. I think it's a really, really good point, because like one of the things I always preach is that if you have the awareness to want to change something in the first place, if you look at behavior really is just it's just the actions that someone puts out in some kind of a consistent pattern into the world. So if you're able to kind of with that awareness be like, hang on, I'm going to stick a flag here, reference point, and think every time I'm going into this situation, I actually want to do that differently. You think you prepare yourself ahead of time and you actually may force a different action to defy the patterns you've been living by. Eventually, you'll break out of those patterns, and eventually what's happening is, your behavior is just what manifests into the world action from an action perspective from yourself. So I mean, that's a basic definition of it, I feel like. But I think that is a really good point that you've made there. And I think that is, part of this like winning mentality that I was starting to kind of talk to, or championship kind of mentality, this idea that you have to always believe you are the best, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I feel as though you need to always believe you're the best person on the server or at the table or in the at the football pitch or wherever you are, whichever competitive arena, because you can't ever have any hesitation that if you're in a bad situation, that is a position you cannot come back from. But at the same time, you also have to respect reality, and it's like a weird duality that's I think can be a struggle sometimes. Like, do you have anything on this topic to speak about?
Yeah, I'd say it's actually more personal than you may realize. That there are some players that like to think that way is just too foreign to them. It's like too optimistic. It's too positive. Like they're just too realistic in a sense. Like they know that they're not the best, and so every individual needs to understand what they need in order to be at their best. And some people need to think that way. They need to go in there thinking that they're the best ones in the server today, like, and that they're going to just dominate, and that's what they need to bring their best. But then there are other players who that's actually not the case, and if they think that way, they're actually going to perform a lot worse because it's going to, in their mind, hold them to a standard or an expectation that they can't live up to. They know that, and so it's not the ideal. And this, research or this sort of dynamic ends up being kind of supported by research, which kind of flies in the face of some of the like positive psychology or the power of positive thinking that's out there. And I think it's actually somewhat damaging to a lot of people, like especially when you're kind of given all these messages like you just need to be positive, you need to think positively, you need to believe in yourself, et cetera, et cetera. When for some people that's actually not the case. They actually perform better with what would be deemed like kind of negative feedback, but it's not negative per se. It's sometimes it's just like kind of a more realistic feedback. You can kind of code it or name it whatever you want. Doesn't really matter to me. It's more that, and this research, kind of came from dart throwing. If you take beginning dart throwers, people that have never thrown darts before, there are certain people who will do better if you say, "Oh, you're doing a great job. Like that was really close. Like good job." Kind of give them more of that praise. And then there are some people that do better if you say, "Oh, wow, I could see you kind of like released it a little low and kind of went down and kind of more focused on like the things that they're doing wrong." And then that provides the feedback with which they can kind of figure out how to do it right. That makes sense.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. That's actually very interesting. I think it's it's very easy to I want to generalize. Like for me personally, when I'm talking about some of these topics, generalize into the things that kind of objectively seem like it makes sense for everybody. But as you say, like people are quite complicated, so it's good to hear a more nuanced opinion and take on this.
Yeah, and when I work with clients, like like the things that we're doing is we get really personal. Like, and again, this is part of the mapping, right? Like, so not only are you mapping the problems, but you're also mapping and trying to understand the causality associated with what allows you to perform at your best, right? What are the factors? What's the formula that when put together equals you just snapping in and playing at your absolute best, right? And how do you sustain it, right? What are the things that are going to cause you to drop out of it and that you can correct really quickly? Like that's how you become a very sort of self-sustaining beast in the server, right? Like what allows the guys that most of you are watching perform at the highest levels? What allows them to stay at that level? Some of it is understanding those factors that allow them to play great. It's also like understanding when they need to dig in and have that resiliency, have that fight, and be able to minimize the degree to which they're going to drop off.
I want to kind of backpedal slightly to earlier when we were talking about people that have this belief that maybe they can't make it. Because one of the things that was on my list to talk to you about was the idea of imposter syndrome. Because this is something I've actually suffered from as well when I was in my playing career. I remember getting to this point where I felt like it was a mixture of things that affected me in the game, whereby if I started to do well, I would self-sabotage and I would like lose focus. And I would start thinking about other things, my focus completely break. And the other thing to it as well was that I would also not practice as much because I would kind of tell myself that, oh, well, this extra couple of hours of practice every day isn't really going to be worth the time because I'm probably only going to achieve this much anyway. Like kind of just limiting beliefs. Do you have anything for people out there? I know obviously these are huge things to unpack, and I don't want to go, for a whole podcast just on this thing. And I know that you probably could do that, but do you have anything just to say on those issues?
Yeah, so we can look at it as simply as being a confidence issue. And so what you want to look at is like what is at the heart of that? So couple things. Sometimes this problem exists because of an illusion of control. And the term self-sabotage is actually one that expresses the illusion of control. And I'll be very explicit what I mean by that. Okay. Self-sabotage in the way that most people think about it, and likely the way that you are as well, especially in the kind of pop psychology, traditional psychology world, self-sabotage in my mind is a meaningless term because true self-sabotage requires an incredible amount of skill where you have firm control over what you are doing in terms of the failure that you're producing. And so the illusion of control shows up here because you believe that you are the one controlling your failure, when in reality, your emotional system has become overactive, caused by a weakness in confidence. That excessive emotion has compromised your ability to perform, compromises your ability to think clearly, and so you naturally fall back in terms of your execution. That's what produces what seems like self-sabotage, like, oh, like I know what I should be doing, but I can't do it. That is not self-sabotage. Self-sabotage is an incredible amount of skill where you are consciously capable of causing yourself to fail. In this case, the emotional system has risen to a level where you're aware of what you should be doing, but the emotional system has removed the strength and power from your mind to translate those thoughts into action. And so you're basically like witnessing your own demise. You're like riding that train, until it crashes, seeing the whole thing happen, unable to actually stop it. That's how you know that it's not self-sabotage, because you actually don't have the control. You think that you do because you're aware, but you mentioned the 4 pillars of competence, right? Second stage of that is called conscious incompetence. You're aware of what you're bad at, but you don't have control. And that's what happens in these moments. So what happens is, right, like on one level, the imposter syndrome is caused by an illusion of control that gets sort of expressed, or it shows up in thinking that you're self-sabotaging. If you view it entirely differently and you say, hang on a second, I'm aware of what's happening, but I can't control it. Let me figure out how I can control it. Let me figure out why my emotional system is overreacting in these ways. And you start digging into the causality. Then you can establish real control. And then you can begin to, kind of break through this pattern. Now, I'll give you one other piece here. Sometimes people, so we talk about like weaknesses in confidence. One example of a weakness in confidence is a perceptual issue that emerges from high expectations. So if you have high expectations, you're basically expecting a lot of yourself. Now, if you look at confidence as being a rating system based off of your evaluation of yourself, okay, so you perform at your expectation, you get 0 points. You exceed your expectation, you get positive points. You fall below your expectation, you get negative points. Okay. Now, what happens when you have high expectations? Right? The odds are that you're actually going to get a lot more negative points than you are positive points. Add that up over a long period of time, you create this perceptual error, which says that you suck, when actually, if you had it more in a more reasonably calibrated measuring system, which happens when you have goals, right? Goals imply process, goals imply learning. And like when you have that kind of viewpoint, you're just a lot more accurate about the degree to which you're actually performing. And so if you compare those two side by side, a person who is much more goal oriented than high expectation oriented has a lot more balanced perspective on their skill set. Somebody who's a lot more high expectation oriented, they tend to have an overly negative viewpoint of their skill set at a deeper level. And so when you're performing at a really high level, you don't actually believe that you're capable of it. So it almost kind of trips you up. Like you become destabilized because in your mind, you can't imagine that you'd be that good. All the while, high expectations have basically created this negative perception that's not deserved. So those are kind of 2 examples of what can create the imposter syndrome.
Yes, it's a really interesting topic because I think a lot of it goes into this. Well, okay, so I want to actually touch on this next idea, which I went back to what you were talking about with expectations, because expectations builds like an emotional investment, as you're saying, with the kind of the points, negative and positive points. And one kind of phenomenon that I've noticed from myself and others around me that's fairly common is that sometimes you'll be in a situation where you're going to make a play. It doesn't matter like what the game is. You decided I'm about to make this play based on the information I have now. And then something changes, which changes the equation fundamentally. But for some reason, you're still so invested in that play you were going to make, as opposed to letting go of that and just accepting that you have to make a new calculation now and decide something else. You go for it anyway, knowing that it's going to probably most certainly fail. Do you know like what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah.
So what the hell is that?
So when we look at like individual, like tactical mistakes like that, it can almost literally be caused by every conceivable mental game issue, right? Like, so you could be bored. And so, even though it's wrong, like, like just the fact that it's wrong is almost a little exciting. And because you're bored, then, the heck with it. It could be because you're tilted and, you just don't care anymore. So it's, a little bit of the fuck it's and just like, whatever, just toss it in, make it happen. Who cares? It could be because of some confidence, right? Like where there's a bit more attachment. You think about like the narrative thing, the attachment to your own righteousness. Like you feel like you're almost kind of more confident in things that you believe are well thought out, and you're not as confident in your ability to adapt. And so, if you're going to fail, again, a lot of this happens like kind of unconsciously, but like if you're going to fail, you feel like you're going to fail based off of what you already decided, not on what's new, which feels a little bit riskier. Obviously, like fear can be in here as well, where, you're just not able to kind of trust your gut as much, overthink those situations, second guess or doubt your decisions. So, I mean, like I said, that if that spot happens for you, you want to really like put a magnifying glass on it, spotlight on it, and study the types of mental or emotional variation that's existing around them, and what are the thoughts, what are the emotions, how your body feels, what's changing in your decision making. Again, like kind of map all the details, and you'll figure out ultimately what's blocking you from being able to execute the way you want to.
So one thing I read, I think it was in a foreword actually to one of Daniel Kahneman's books, Thinking Fast and Slow, I think it was in the foreword where he's basically describing the objective of the book. It was to effectively codify that area that he was talking about and create the language so that people had the ability to kind of see it and name it. And like with your books, is that something that you do?
100%. I mean, I think so. I'm in the middle of working on a book for traders, and I did this with poker players, and I obviously do this with my esport guys. Being able to take their language and organize it in a way that says, oh, okay, I have this issue, right? I didn't know that having this particular thought, like how saying how could I be so stupid, would be an example of mistake tilt. It's like, oh, I say that all the time. Oh, so maybe I have mistake tilt. So then you look at mistake tilt and you start reading through the descriptions. Like, if I did a good job and you have a fairly standard version of mistake tilt, like you're going to see yourself like in the book in that way. And so, yeah, it becomes sort of a way of helping you to kind of self-determine like what issues you have, because like you said before, it all just kind of runs together. And until you're able to kind of separate out things, then it's a book like this that can help to do that. And, I mean, frankly, that's generally like why I've written the poker books, why I'm going to continue to write books like this, because I only have so many hours in a day, and there's a lot of people that could use the help.
Yeah, and for those listening, it's the mental game of poker. So the links will be in the description, but definitely check it out. It's definitely very important, I think, for people to understand. I think that poker specifically, at least for me, to esports translates incredibly well when it comes to so many of the concepts. One of the ideas for me that was initially very powerful about poker was simply just a perspective thing, understanding that there is, I mean, obviously there is such a thing as variance, but if you're a poker player, you can see it so much more easily than you can if you're playing CounterStrike, where all you really see is everything round to round. Whereas a poker player has a tool that can tell him what happened over the last 100,000 hands, and he can see, okay, I've been running this strategy. I can see how effective it is given the variance. And that guy, it may have been like 20,000 hands, which were really shit, but didn't mean that he was doing the wrong thing, because maybe it ended up that he actually ended up making loads of money and it all worked. And that's the same thing, I think, that principle carries across, but the perspective is much harder, I think, to find within CounterStrike itself, that sometimes the game is just really bad. And there's so many variables that are moving around. You can't control all of them. And so it's better to remind oneself of that. And I think for me, that allowed me to kind of just suddenly just have this acceptance of when something was really bad. It allowed me to leverage that into understanding that this experience is something I can now say, okay, well, I'm not going to get this out of this experience, but what I could get out of it is working on this, or I could work on focusing on this thing or that thing. And it completely took my mind into a productive place and out of any negative space. That was like one of the immediate things I got from poker, and there's many others as well.
Yeah, it's breaking your illusion of control. I mean, because that's ultimately what variance is about, right? If you can't see the random factors that influence the outcome, then it's easy for you to think that you are to blame or you are responsible, right? So it can either feed, fear or anger or loss of confidence, or it can feed overconfidence and you thinking that you're actually better than you are. That illusion of control is a hard one to crack, but it sounds like you use poker in a pretty effective way to help you.
Yeah. I think that if I had to speak it to any other big concept from poker, for me, it would definitely be outcome-oriented behavior. Because once I started thinking about that, initially, I started to understand that you can effectively, like, you're playing a game which has some rules and you have some objectives and things that you want to achieve, and that's all well and good. But it might be the case that things are inherently there's an inherent variance. For example, in a game like CounterStrike, or really any sport, there's an execution component, and the execution component does have an inherent variance, because we're human beings, and that's just kind of how that works. And it can be good days and bad days. But when it comes to decision making can be pretty consistent. You just have to have a mental space that is also kind of handled and well, and is well composed, and then you can always be making good decisions. And so if you instead you decide that my win condition is actually completely separate of the game that I'm playing and getting to 16 rounds and stuff, that's all cool and everything. But what I really care about, actually, did I make the correct decisions? Then all of a sudden that also transformed my experience to be much more productive as well. When I started looking at things like that, when I realized I could retrain the parameters effectively to what I could consider a success criteria. And that's something that I try to talk to people about. Are there similar topics within that you also kind of talk to people that you're coaching?
Yeah, for sure. I think the challenging part for some players is that so if I'm not going to measure myself based on results, I'm going to measure myself based on my decisions, then I need to be damn well clear what my decisions, what my strategy is based off of. Because it's easy to just sort of say, all right, well, I made a good decision here, it just didn't work out well, when your strategy actually might suck. So it becomes challenging to really hold yourself accountable to understanding what is good decision making, what is good execution, and not just allowing yourself to kind of blame the loss on something outside of yourself. So you can kind of and I see people kind of make errors in the other direction too, where they become so process oriented that they lose sight of the fact that the game is ultimately about winning. And variance aside, these are things that you have to overcome. Maybe you can't always overcome them in the short term against a pretty equally matched opponent who might get a couple kills through smokes, or just kind of peak at the right time, or some of the variables that can exist. They may be able to beat you just as a result of that, but you guys play 15 times. If you are the better team, odds are you're going to end up proving yourself on the other side. So yeah, I would say the ability to identify what good decision making is, what good execution looks like, is something that you have to be fairly ruthless about, and not just allow yourself the freedom to make excuses too easily.
I think that actually leads really nicely into this idea of, there's this idea to me of this duality of, you have to be have the humility to always be open to, I might not understand everything and I must be a student of the game. I must go out there and always study the theory and always look at everything in Counter-Strike as though I have something to learn, as opposed to shutting yourself off to any learning. But also at the same time carry the confidence of a master, which is kind of the antithesis of a student, potentially, but maybe not.
Yeah, no. So I would look at that maybe less in terms of a duality and more of like a yin and yang that like actually kind of feed each other, right? So there's a time and place for both mentalities, right? You're not a learner when you're playing, period, right? You're not there to learn. You're there to execute. It's afterwards that you reflect. You might watch a VOD. You might talk with other teammates. Whatever you got to do, you learn from it, so that you become like a student afterwards, and perhaps a little bit before, but mostly right before you want to play and right when you are playing, you are there to execute, and that's the only thing you're focused on. Everybody's a little bit different in terms of when they shut off one and turn on the other, but at the end of the day, the two feed together, and you don't have to have them exclusively.
So moving forwards a little bit, have you actually played any Counter-Strike since you've picked up coaching TeamLiquid? Well, actually, you've been coaching them for like a couple of years, actually.
Yeah, 3. It's
3 years.
just over 3 years now.
Of course, because you started with Zeus.
Yeah, actually, technically, with Peacemaker.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was my first event that I went to. This was actually before I was technically hired by Liquid. I went to ESL1 New York in 2016, and had a chance to observe and just see what this thing was about. And I had other than playing video games as a kid, I mean, I had never console games, not like the real esport type games. Had no kind of context for it, and yeah, it was remarkable. I mean, walking out with these guys to see 1,000 people lined up for autographs was just like mind blowing. But no, I've not played Counter-Strike, and I've watched way more of it than I would have ever imagined I ever would have. And I mean, it's like I don't know, like, so if I'm not working with an esports team, am I watching Counter-Strike? Probably watching some of the guys that I would still have some fondness for. But yeah, I mean, like when I'm watching because I want to obviously cheer on my guys and keep a pulse on what I need to be doing and helping them out.
Yeah, you have an emotional investment.
Very much so. Very much so.
Right. So speaking of I want to speak about biofeedback. Do you think there's any sort of biofeedback mechanisms that, so for example, I mean, to what extent do certain things influence our mental performance? For example, like we know, let's say if you're sitting in a room with a trash can that's really smelly, that's going to make you. I've seen a study somewhere about this. It makes you it impacts your decision making. Or for example, we know that if you're well hydrated and if you've had good sleep, you're going to be making consistently better decision making and have your mood is going to be such that you'll be in a better place to make better decisions and be more emotionally stable. Like, what sort of, are there any kind of tools that people may not suspect that can help us to maintain a good mental clarity when we're kind of readying ourselves to compete or whatever it might be?
So the trash can thing, like I've seen lots of these studies where like there was one study that I quite fond of too, where people spent time doing like word searches, and a group of people were searching for words, and they all had to do with being old, and another group was just searching random words, and they measured the pace of the way that people walked back to where they had to hand the test in, and the people who were reading stuff about being old walked slower. These kinds of very short-term influences are just that. And I don't know that I've seen, actually, no, I have not seen research that has measured those kinds of things in a performance capacity. So I'm cautious around the degree to which that actually has reliability, because players who have like a really strong mentality can deal with a lot of variety of stuff going on. The environment's cold, it's noisy, the desk is not exactly the right height. Like they just find a way, and that's a mark of, in my mind, a great champion, right? That they have that kind of flexibility and adaptability. Sleep, diet, exercise, like caffeine intake, like those are very distinct variables that have been tested and reliably proven, to have a direct impact on performance. So those are the things I, kind of veer towards. When you're looking at like biofeedback is more of a training tool, and you kind of have to be a little bit cautious because you don't want to like train a problem that needs like a deeper fix. Like you don't want to use biofeedback as
Right.
like crutches, right? Like you want to actually fix your twisted ankle, not have to rely on crutches. Now, for some people who might have ADD or some focus issues, there are some biofeedback tools that can be incredibly helpful to actually build the skill that can really help them. So, kind of have to understand those dynamics. But at the end of the day, for me, I come back to old reliable, which is find the things that make you play well and just do more of them. You're already doing them because right now, all of you can be at your absolute best. And if you can understand what makes you perform at your absolute best on some days and not on others, you're going to go a long way towards kind of figuring out what the formula is for yourself. I'm not kind of big in using like
Yeah.
external environmental stuff to create that high performance. Certainly like within a team structure, that's different, where the infrastructure and the environment that we're creating is highly fine tuned for each particular team. If I look at the CounterStrike team to the League of Legends team to the Dota team, each environment has its own differences, even though there are some fundamental principles that are true among all of them.
And one thing, I'm sorry to jump around a lot, but of course, there's just so many things that
Adaptable.
I want to get your thoughts on. Normally, the conversation's more organic and fluid, I swear. But I wanted to mention visualization, because this is something that does increase our reaction times dramatically. It's something that I think any aspiring sort of talented professional player just does automatically. Maybe they've never even thought about what they're doing, but they are doing it. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on visualization, because again, people don't really talk about it too much, but it obviously is beneficial. Are there any additional ways that it can help you, or any additional ways that you can help to train it? Or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it is a skill like anything else. So I think, like you said, so people who are doing it naturally don't even necessarily realize it. I mean, essentially, visualization is done best when it's practical. So, you just like visualizing yourself getting an ace and just like rolling over, like, I mean, that's just like not, that's a fantasy, that's not what is likely to occur. So when we look at like visualization as it occurs in the military, where, their degree of preparation has to be so precise because the consequences there is actual death. So their visualization is much more practical. They're visualizing all the things that can go wrong, and they're kind of playing it out in their mind how that's going to change and impact their decision making. And so what that does is allows them to, practice 40 different scenarios for, one mission. And so, yeah, as a player in Counter-Strike, the consequences of your decisions are not nearly as costly, but you can do the same kind of thing, right? So, you have a strat, you understand what you're going to do. Okay, well, what are you going to do if it gets blown up in a couple different ways? How are you going to adjust? Or, you can visualize yourself, running that strat and doing it 5 times in your mind and just trying to train the proper execution of it, and then perhaps the the adaptation to it as well. But I'd say visualization is likely aided by doing a little bit of training and meditation. Meditation, if you want to just remove the fuzziness of it for some people, it's just basic training for your mind, right? If you're an athlete, you're going to build muscle in your muscles because that's what's going to make you stronger, faster, more flexible, more agile, like whatever you need to do to compete. I mean, mentally, like we have to start treating our mind, in the same way that athletes treat their body. And so meditation is a tool to train focus, train awareness, get better at visualization. So there's lots of ways to sort of create it, but I'd say the biggest mistake people make is turning visualization into something that's more fantasy-like than practical.
Yeah, and a specific Counter-Strike example for people out there is whenever effectively what crosshair placement is a tool to almost aid visualization. You place your crosshair around the corner, and you're kind of visualizing that enemy model kind of popping into it. Maybe that someone's going to jiggle peek you, but that is a spot that you selected as the most likely weak point or the most likely next point of engagement. So if you just add a little bit of extra visualization to it, maybe it's something that comes through, maybe it's not, but it gives you a job. It gives you a focus point, and it will definitely speed up the reaction. So I like the talk about meditation because it does have this very woo kind of reputation, but of course it is, and also I think as you said it, I think you mentioned it being a tool for training focus. I think people sometimes think it almost the opposite, where they feel like it's because I think we have these old notions, these old conceptions that it's about thinking or having no thoughts, which is kind of almost the opposite of focus, where in reality, as you say, you generate kind of that better awareness, which really is just about focus and also about removing some attachment to ideas, just processing them, letting them go, and so on. And I usually reference Sam Harris to people because he has a great app for that these days. I don't know if you have any other recommendations if someone's looking to get into meditation.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just say Headspace is probably the one that I hear about most commonly. I don't use it, but that's the one that most of my clients end up telling me that they use.
Right. So before I go into some of the fan questions and so on, it would be a grave injustice if I wasn't to mention consistency or flow state. We haven't yet talked about those things. So I guess consistency. Oh, to also tilt, consistency, and flow state. So that's our list now. So consistency is obviously, I suppose, a sum really of someone that's done a very good job in kind of every area of their kind of mental game. But is there anything else that you haven't already talked about that you think really adds to achieving consistency at the kind of the highest level?
I would say it's a lot of just dedication to practicing, the basics. It's easy to think that you've got it, and the proof is in the pudding when you show up to play. And if you make a mistake that you think that you quote unquote shouldn't, it doesn't matter if you were tilted or just pissing in your pants with fear and shock and whatever. Like, if you make a mistake like that, doesn't matter the cause. You have not actually mastered that aspect of your technique. Yes, right. Having that mental and emotional stuff removed and you being in a better state of mind makes it easier for that to show up and make it feel like it's automatic. But the reality is, like, even when you are the most tilted you could possibly be, there are still things that you used to do that you no longer do, or mistakes that you used to make that you no longer make. Right. So, like, tilt can be fairly revealing to understanding truly what you've mastered. And you got to be really cold and honest with yourself. And anything that's not there, you have not mastered yet. So consistency comes, I think, sometimes from brutal honesty and then putting in the dedication to do things that most people aren't willing to do because they are, talk about, overconfident. They are convinced that they're better than they are, and that like practicing that stuff is beneath them.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to kind of reemphasize. Just the honesty is really a sign of strength, and honesty is something to be practiced. And there's opportunities to practice it, and there's opportunities to kind of ignore it. And I think that's a distinction that isn't made sometimes. And it's easier to just run with the narrative that you've been telling yourself, that you've been going with already, because that's the kind of easy and lazy solution. And I feel as though it seems to be the pattern that our mind likes to drift into the path of least resistance as much as it possibly can. And that's that's just the way the mind works. It is what it is. And so we have to be aware of that.
Yeah, and I would add, like, lazy sometimes equals overconfident, right? That overconfidence sometimes precedes the laziness. And when we look at general society, especially in the U.S., and this is true to a certain degrees in other countries as well, but a lot of this research comes from the U.S., so I kind of qualify it that way. But when you do comparative analyses of people's ratings of themselves, about their intelligence, about their level of attractiveness, their sense of humor, around 75% of people believe that they are above average. So if you do the math, that doesn't quite check out, right? So what that says is that the majority of people are actually overconfident about their real ability. So you got to really be aware of that because it's a lot more common than you think. And if you think that you're not overconfident, you better have proof because otherwise you're probably overconfident.
Right. And speaking of actual a good level of confidence, when we are in flow state, it is of course the most desirable place to be. It almost sometimes feels like that's what we do it for, because that feeling that sometimes it's just so hard to capture. But when you do, it feels so good. You can see stuff happening in slow motion. You can see things ahead of time, like you're a prophet, and it allows you to play your absolute best. You're just jacked into that intuition system in your brain, and there's nothing interrupting it. So how do we get there and the quickest and stay there the longest?
Again, it's a formula. So there's a few concepts that I describe in the Mental Game of Poker 2, subtle plug there, that are required for it. But I'd say the one that people tend to not kind of firmly understand is that there are two main factors that are at play. One is energy. The other is what I would call like clarity, or the degree to which your mind is clear of the learning that's been occurring. When you're in the zone, you are actually learning at an incredibly high level, not consciously. Key point, right? I mentioned earlier, you are not actively learning while you are playing, but of course you are, because you're absorbing so much information. Absorption of information is kind of like a sponge. That is the essence of learning, which that data kind of converts into insight or kind of future competence. So the ability to have the right amount of energy, right? It's a very, very fine edge, right? You have too much energy, one too many monsters, and you'll go across that edge. Find that right balance. You're right there. If you're a little bit bored, you're a little distracted, you're a little tired, overconfident, your energy is too low, you're not in the zone. So you have to have the right amount of energy, and the right amount of energy is different for each person. Some people, it's that like hyper bugged out, highly intense sort of sense. Others, it's this very kind of calm, easy, flowy. Others are kind of more in the middle, what I would just call like kind of like solidly engaged, right? Like they're not jacked out of their mind, and they're not just like this very calm, flowiness. So you can find the right kind of energy for yourself, and you figure out the factors and the ways in which you can get there. And then when it comes to learning, you have to keep your mind clear. And so like writing is a very powerful tool to keep your mind clear. And it's something that is so easy, but most people aren't willing to do it because they want to see the value be really big when the value is really, really day-to-day basis. And it's like, you're not hitting home runs, right? It's a lot of base hits and stuff that makes all the difference.
Yeah, and I'll take this opportunity to once again re-emphasize the point you just made, because I think it is very pronounced and important. The writing thing, if you are somebody listening to this because you're interested in what insights you can glean from a sports performance perspective, that is definitely just like go get a pen and make that your favorite pen that goes with you everywhere, because I completely agree. I think that the writing will help you not only to figure out your own language, but also how that kind of will allow you to relate with what is happening in the game and your objectives. And you'll be surprised. I mean, we have to understand that the human memory is kind of shit. To be honest, like it's pretty shit. Our short-term memory, we can only hold so much, and the longer that goes on without recalling that information, all that stuff might be lost. The emotional importance of that moment, if it's put off, that might be lost later, and so that information then becomes meaningless, and you're just really losing an opportunity to potentially better yourself. And the writing is a process, and don't think you can pull out your notepads on your PC. Get the pen and the paper. It's specifically a different experience. So just
Speaking of all that, there's a book that people must read called The Invisible Gorilla. It's written by two authors who I highly respect, and they're incredibly talented at what they do. It helps you to kind of understand a lot of these everyday illusions in our lives, and one of them is the illusion of memory. And it's another form of overconfidence where you think your memory is a lot more strong than it is, and it ain't. So yeah, definitely a must read.
I've got to say, it is fascinating and incredible, but at the same time extremely infuriating how our minds by default, the default settings just don't really seem to work out in the ways that we want. And we have to learn so many interesting things about how the mind works to fine tune things to make it do what we want. But maybe that's kind of it though. Maybe, you know, as you've basically been conveying the entire podcast, we are so individually specific that to have the best case for each individual has to be very specific. And also we, as you also mentioned, we're extremely adaptable. So I guess, you know, it's like an equalizer. You got to kind of find the right little dials to push up and to push down. And I guess it might as well all start at one spot.
Yeah, and if you engage in this process, then you become a lifelong learner in this regard. And you know, if you're going to be around for a while, you know, you're going to keep needing to adapt. I mean, you know, I have a 5.5-year-old now. My mentality, what it takes for me to be at my best, what I'm capable of in terms of being at my best, is functionally different now than it was, you know, 7 years ago. And you know, in large measure for the better. In some ways, more challenging, but I can tell you now, I can operate at a way better ability on little sleep. In fact, last night I got 5.5 hours sleep, which is way below my preferred. And you know, we're now talking at 9:30 my time. I've basically been going since 5:30 this morning. You know, talking with clients all day and doing lots of other book work, and you know, so like my capacity to go deep, is different. My point is that the mental game is a game, right? And like any game, there's a strategy that continues to evolve. You continue to evolve. And so there is no like mastery in terms of like you getting to the point where you're done, right? Which is why we all love CounterStrike, because, you know, as long as the game keeps changing and the players keep evolving, like you're just not going to solve the game, right? Yes, there's, you know, certainly now we see tons of parity in terms of the other competitors, but you know, it's not a solved game. We're not playing tic-tac-toe here. And so, yeah, a lot of individual understanding, a lot of understanding about the ways in which we're all similar in terms of how the mind functions, the rules that we all play by. But then there's a lot of nuances and differences that you really have to understand for yourself, understand how those play out throughout your lifespan. Because if you start working on this now, you will set yourself up for a lifetime, not only of greater success, but I think more importantly, greater satisfaction. There are a lot of miserable millionaires out there, and I'm purposely calling out, you know, monetary success as being one version of it, but it doesn't matter whether we're talking about monetary success or, you know, other forms of it. Like success is not going to make you happy. Circumstances are not going to make you happy or miserable, right? It's your own mentality that you bring to something that ultimately is what's going to define the degree of satisfaction, pride, confidence that you're going to derive from what you do. And yes, being really good at something can help to build your confidence, but it's not just that, right? It's understanding the way in which you operate and being able to impact and have more control over the way you operate. That ultimately brings a lot more satisfaction. So start the process now, because it certainly will put you ahead of the curve.
Very well said. And I am impressed at your lucidity given your circumstances. So that's even more impressive. So quickly before I go into the fan questions, for those people listening expecting me to ask questions that, you know, pertain specifically to Liquid players that Jared has worked with, you know, I'm respecting the kind of the confidentiality there, and those guys are coming on and doing podcasts. So you know, that's we have that covered, basically, I would say.
Yeah, I won't tell the guys how much I hate some of the players.
Speaking of which, we have the first question I want to take from Twitter is actually from Zeus, who of course you worked with, and people who have just joined CounterStrike recently. Zeus was perhaps the coach that I think that, I mean, along with Zonic, that I respect the most, given the fact that I felt like he did something that, and we recorded a podcast about this for like 2 hours. We were talking about it. He did something that a lot of coaches don't do or have the insight to do, and that is to create a extremely good team culture, which is something that has now, you know, even though he has left, he has, you know, left the mark of that, left the framework of that, and it's something that all those players benefited enormously from it. So that's like I just going off into a little bit of a tangent about Zeus there for those that don't know Zeus, but I imagine he learned a lot from you. Actually, you know what? Because I really like to hear this. You know, what were you surprised at all when you first started working with Zeus about the way that he viewed everything as a coach?
Surprised, no, because I mean, once you get to know him, you see how introspective he is, how creative he is, how passionate he is. So, yeah, no, I mean, it was fun to work with him for the time that we had. I mean, um, he and I are similar in terms of our uh, like creative, just like figure stuff out kind of mentality. Like we see a problem, we want to fix it, and like our minds just like kind of don't stop until we are able to figure it out. And so, yeah, the two of us would kind of geek out at times, straight trying to put our heads together to figure out like what the team needed and how to continue to evolve. But yeah, I mean, he was at the top for a long time for a good reason.
Well, he asks for you to share your thoughts on the benefits and downsides of having such a young core of players like Liquid CS:GO squad, and why they seem to come more mentally prepared than older generations.
So I can't say this for every other, kind of the elders in a sense, but sometimes the longer you've been around, you can just start to take things for granted, and just your preparation for that reason just gets looser, right? You're younger, you're hungrier, and you're willing to do whatever it takes. So, those kinds of things can cause that. But I don't think that's exclusive, right? Because I've worked with players on, like the League of Legends team who kind of defy that logic, right? We had one of the oldest teams in NALCS, and they're also still some of the hardest working players. So I don't think that's an exclusive thing, but I think it's easy when you're young and hungry and you don't have a lot to lose and you've got a lot to prove to get yourself prepared and do what's necessary.
That is perhaps like a topic for another day if we ever do another podcast, whereby we kind of dive into the idea of hunger and how because a lot of people think, oh, you kind of age out of esports, and it's really interesting because I don't think that there really needs to be any reason for that. I've actually seen a lot of the players as they get older, they actually get better mechanically as they understand things
Sure.
more. But it is obviously, as you say, it's about that hunger and that motivation. And like also, I think the points you've made before, every circumstance is kind of, you have the liberty to kind of create almost a context or create a model of looking at things that, or a better framework that can maybe recapture some of that hunger. So kind of like a teaser there, perhaps for future discussions. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I'll say one thing. This is an entirely different topic, but I would strongly recommend the Netflix documentary Born Strong, and it's about like the massive like power lifters, like the world's strongest men. And what's interesting is that the guys at the top tend to be like 38, 40 years old. Like they're, fairly old for like, like what we'd consider to be like the prime of most traditional sports, where that's, tends to be on the decline. Um, and the reason is because of how long it takes to actually build muscle that's capable of doing the things that they're doing. And so the reason I say that is because like when you are a veteran in the esports world, you do have a ton of knowledge, and that knowledge can either be a burden or it can be a foundation. And if you view it as a foundation, then it's just something that you use and leverage to learn more efficiently than somebody who's new to the scene and has to do a lot more catching up, which is ultimately what the guys at the top of the world's strongest men competition have. They have years where they can kind of see the newcomers coming along and they can learn from them and they can kind of use them to keep their lead ahead of them. I'm still somewhat surprised by the whole like aging out of esports thing. Like this is too freaking new for people to have the limitations that exist here. Like
Yep.
Roger Bannister, 4 Minute Mile. Like like if there's one thing that is true is that we humans have continued to defy the limitations that we've sort of set into ourselves. So it's mind-boggling to me that people think that like you're going to age out. It's not aging out. That age is not the factor. The main factor is desire. Main factor is the willingness to keep doing what's necessary. age per se.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. The next question comes from Jason O'Toole, another pillar of the community, Moses, and he's asking. This is a good question, actually. If you know of any ways of quantifying the influence or impact of a team's mentality or mental game on their performance.
Quantifying it, I have not come across ways of quantifying it. I think at any stage we're at best going to come like at an estimate that's going to look like a Venn diagram, where we're going to guess as to how much the mechanical, the strategic, the mental are kind of like converging to influence the degree to which that performance was impacted by those factors. I think at the end of the day, you can't necessarily say that one was the most or least. I guess you could say that one was the most or least important factor, but they're all just like kind of like feeding off of each other, right? Like, and so to like separate one means that you're trying to isolate two variables that probably could be measured more effectively. But then, how do you measure the impact of the mentality in terms of the practice that was required to develop those mechanical skills? That's a thing too. So yeah, I don't know that we can quantify it, but I can say that the idea that any game is like 90% mental, right? This was a mainstay in golf. I've heard it in trading. I'm sure people have said it in esports. And at the end of the day, that's just complete BS, right? Even at the highest levels, yes, you can say that the mental game can be like a difference maker, but you could say the same thing about mechanical skill. Yeah, sure, the mechanical skill might be really, really close, but sure there are some players that have, 0.5%, 1/4% better mechanical skill, and how does that show up in terms of their tactics? So my point is that no, I don't think we can quantify it, but I do think that the ways in which we typically attempted to quantify it are very kind of clunky and just flawed.
Gotcha. Well, question from Fart Nuggets. Very nice. Comparing all of your different clients in the various industries, which client in your career do you feel you've had the most impact on, and how does Liquid fit in the grand scheme of your career?
Um, Hard to say grand scheme of my career because I feel like I'm kind of like in the middle of my prime, or I'd say maybe the early stages of my prime. So yeah, it's for me, it's less about like the clientele and like kind of what industry they're operating in, and more about like just the quality of the people. And so like the ones that I like to work with the most are the ones that are like really dedicated. They're like willing to do all the the small work and the details, and really kind of get in the trenches with me, and also just be like guys that or people, women that I want to hang around with and like have fun with, and can have conversations with. Like we're oftentimes working, especially with the Liquid players, for hours and days at a time, and that's I think like the reason that I'm like still with Liquid, and will be with them for as long as I can imagine. Right? They're just good people, and that's something that I think comes from the top with Victor and Steve and the ownership group. Like they're just like a really good group of people first, and then obviously they're professionally really competent as well. So yeah, we have a lot of fun, and do some good work together. So yeah, I'd say like the Liquid core is just like a really great complement for me. I actually like around 2013, 2014, I realized that I was a little bit kind of over leveraged in poker. Like poker was like 95% of my client base, and I like really consciously decided to try to branch out, and got more trading clients, got more golf clients again, started doing some work with business people, and then Liquid came in, and it's kind of filled like a nice like other role. So like I have just like a really cool mix of people that I'm talking to on a daily basis, and at any given day talking with people on 3 to 4 different continents makes my day interesting and challenging, which is kind of what I need.
Okay, so I'm not sure if you can answer this next question. You let me know. It's all good. So from Andrew Kim, he said, "What does Stewie bring to the Liquid core in terms of confidence and morale?" And I guess he's asking that because that is very much the outwards perception that we have of Stewie. So definitely someone that seems like a good captain type figure in a team.
Yeah, I think he's definitely brought that. So like we look at like Stewie is like really intense. I think that intensity was kind of like misperceived by his prior teams is my guess, like where, like there may have been problems, but I think like as a team, like we like kind of love and understand him for who he is. And, he's like a great fit for the reasons that were just talked about. So yeah, he does bring, that vital energy to the team. And at the same time, I think, the other guys have continued to level up and step up what they need to, which is, a big reason why we were so successful this summer. And, I talk about the evolution of the game, evolution of the mental game. And obviously we're in a position where we're continuing to evolve and figuring out what is required for us to continue to succeed at the highest level.
All right. Well, I have one last question for you after that, and it will be: what are you working on in terms of your own self development, and whether that be your golf game or picking up a new skill or whatever it might be.
So for me, it's mostly about my like professional growth. Like, right now, I've actually put my golf aspirations on hold because of what I'm trying to accomplish with my career. So for me, like my like professional development is really kind of pushing myself to be more structured and disciplined throughout the day so that I can just kind of like maximize my overall output. And, so I'm writing another book, and I'll continue to create more content kind of alongside of the client work that I'm doing. But it's been challenging over the years to, like writing is not something that naturally comes to me. I've that part of my schooling was not a strength, and so it's been challenging. So it like requires a lot of mental energy, and it requires some real, I would say, structure and discipline for me to like kind of squeeze out of my day everything I'm trying to. And so I have, like I've learned ways to prepare myself for that work and to kind of work my way out of it and get myself ready for my client work and to juggle all the other things that I'm trying to manage on a daily basis, on top of being a husband and a father. So for me, it does come down to kind of focus and discipline. And for a time being, I'd say a couple of years ago, it came down to fear. That so like while I kind of had broken through some of the bigger issues with fear and choking that I experienced in golf, like I said, there's an evolution to it. And there were a couple of years ago, there were some additional layers where even though I had a lot of success in poker and had a really well-rounded client base and felt like I had really established myself, when it came to putting out more content, the fear of criticism, the fear of just like failing was there. And so I've had to do some like kind of really deep introspective work to figure out what that next layer was all about. And it for me, the golf stuff was a more performance thing. It was more kind of this like middle layer of issues that weren't really personal. This latest round a couple of years ago was more personal. So having kind of broken through that, and this is actually a really important point for some people. Sometimes you have to remove issues, right? Like for me, getting rid of this fear was a big thing because it wasn't about discipline and focus for me back then. Focus and discipline were a symptom of that problem. And so it looked like it at times, but I was kind of continually getting tripped up, and I just could not get myself to break through. That's not the case now. Like the fear is gone. I've worked through that. But what remains now is the need to kind of build the structure and the raw skills of that focus and discipline, that I want at that next level. So sometimes you have to look at the removal of problems, but once you do that, it doesn't automatically mean that you're going to be firing on all cylinders and have the level of competency and proficiency that you want. Sometimes you have to kind of like actually build it. So, it's almost like building a house in the wilderness, right? Like getting rid of the fear was kind of akin to just like clearing the territory, like knocking down the trees, like getting the site ready to build. Once I'd done that, then I actually had to build the house. And that's kind of in the process I've been in, and will continue to be, because I think it's something that will need to get better at, because I suspect that my life is going to continue to evolve as, I want to start getting golf back in here once this book's out. And, it's just a constant juggling act. So, yeah, that's those are the big things for me right now.
That's so awesome to know that you're kind of powering forward with more content, because I feel like a lot of the stuff that you've talked about and the way that you talk about it does create a level of accessibility And it should be, I think, ultimately accessible to people, and much more so than it is. And so I'm really glad you're doing what you're doing, and I look forward to reading everything. Alas, I wasn't able to read your material before doing the podcast, which I was really sad about. As I had like a tooth extraction, so I'm on a little pain medication. So, yeah, I definitely recommend everyone pick up your work so they can start sinking their teeth into stuff, because it will just directly translate to CSGO or whatever other competitive thing you're doing. Do you have any other book recommendations for people? I know you dropped a couple already in the podcast, and I'll make sure to put those in the description too.
Yeah, I'll mention one thing just as a plug. The book actually is available for free on audiobook. You go to jaredtendlerpoker.com/free, and you can get the link to the free audiobook, or the way to get it for free. You just have to sign up for a free account anyway. Very kind of simple way of getting the material without actually paying for it. In terms of other work, I would highly recommend anything by Cal Newport. He wrote a book called Deep Work, and most recently a book called Digital Minimalism. I think is very, very important for this audience. Smartphone era, internet accessibility is affecting you in ways that you don't realize. And yeah, you need to get educated on it, because it's going to impact your ability to be as effective as you think you or as effective as you want to be. And we think about these signals of problems, right, and helping you to kind of map and become more aware of them. The impact of having a smartphone right in front of you at all times and responding immediately to that kind of information, and is a potentially big problem that's going to impact your ability to have the kind of deep penetrating focus and practice and diligence that is required to perform at the high level. So yeah, so Cal Newport's a fantastic author in that regard. You mentioned Thinking Fast and Slow, great book as well. The book The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle, I think, is a really cool resource. Kind of tries to conceptualize the idea of talent in a much more practical way. Obviously kind of reduces it in that practice and hard work is far more important than like what we consider to be raw talent, but definitely an interesting read. And I'd say the book Drive is an important one as well. Daniel Pink, maybe more so like kind of after you've achieved some success, right? Like what's going to give you the next level, motivation to get you to keep pushing yourself forward. That book visualizes what motivates people. It's not necessarily a performance book. It's more of a kind of a like motivation in life, motivation in work kind of thing, but one that I think certainly applies well to performance, and one I recommend.
Actually, did you ever come across this? I think it was actually just a series of podcasts actually from like 10 years ago called I think it's the 8-Fold Path to Poker Enlightenment. Have you come across that?
Tommy Angelo, I know him well.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, yeah. Okay. I can recommend that one, because that was something I listened to, which was incredibly impactful for me over 10 years ago. So I could drop that one in there as well.
Yeah. Next time I see Tommy, I'll let him know you you appreciate it.
Yeah, it's good stuff. All right. Thank you so much, Jared, for coming on. It was an absolute pleasure. I can't wait to get my notepad out and make some notes on this, because there's definitely some stuff I need to go back over.
Awesome. Enjoyed it. Well, great talking to you as well, and I'm going to go to sleep.
All right. Cheers. Have a good night.
All right. Take care. You too.